Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Vasia Madesi, and I'm part of the GenderSAFE team on behalf of Yellow Window. It's really a pleasure to welcome you to this webinar on our institutional assessment tool. Before we begin, just a quick note that the session is being recorded. Only the presenter's contributions will appear in the recording, and any questions or reactions or reflections shared in the chat, as well as any interventions, will not be included in the final version. Only presenters will be included in the recording. So before we start, and as more people appear in today's webinar, I will start with a few ground rules in order to create a safe space. To help us keep a constructive and secure environment, a few brief rules. Like first, this is a safe space. Please feel free to engage openly and respectfully. We encourage you to be curious and ask questions, and please share any questions in the chat as they arise. Unfortunately, as we are expecting many participants today, we won't be able to include any interventions. So this way we have muted all your microphones. This is not possible. So any questions, please dedicate some moment to write them short and concise in the chat box. We will collect them and address them during the dedicated Q&A session towards the end. If possible, keep them short so we can cover as many as we can. So let me briefly walk you through today's flow. We'll start with an opening overview from Marcela Linková, who will introduce the tool's rationale and its institutional relevance. This will be followed by a guided demonstration and presentation by Panagiota Polykarpou, who will walk us through the structural logic and functionalities also of the tool. And then we will hear reflections from two institutions that have already tested the tool. These are Iveta Bayerová from Salers University and Jennifer Kirman from Oxford Brookes University. They will share their experience with the assessment process, usability, insights, and how they plan to use the results internally. So we will close the session with a moderated discussion and open Q&A. Also to mention, before we move into the presentations, I would like to briefly introduce our speakers for today, starting with Marcela and Panagiota. So we are very fortunate to have with us colleagues who were directly involved in the development of the tool. So Marcela Linková is head of the Center for Gender and Science and the Institute of Sociology of the Czech Academy of Sciences. Her work spans research, support activities, and advocacy. Her research focuses on the sociology of gendered organizations and institutional change, gender-based violence in academia, governance of research, and public policies for gender equality in research and innovation. Marcela is the member state co-chair of the ERA Forum subgroup on inclusive gender equality. She has been the coordinator of EU-funded projects, including Gender Action and Gender Action Plus, and she has participated in a number of other EU-funded projects, including Gender Equality Academy, Gender Smart, Casper, UNICEF, and currently GenderSAFE. On the other hand, we also have with us my colleague Panagiota Polykarpou, who is a consultant for equality, diversity, and inclusion, with a background in business management and social innovation, specializing in supporting European research and innovation projects. So without any further ado, and thank you once again for being here today with us, I'm pleased to hand the floor to Marcela to open the session and present you some background information on the policies. I will stop sharing my screen to allow Marcela to share hers.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Vasia, and welcome everyone. I will now start sharing my screen and get going with the presentation. You should now see it in presentation mode. So I will be presenting the policy framework at the EU level that we have and that forms the background to the self-assessment tool being launched today. So this may come as a surprise to some of you, but in the European research area, gender-based violence was not a policy issue until 2018, so very recently, when the then ERAC Standing Working Group on Research and Innovation put this topic into its work program and created the first policy mapping and report with recommendations to the European Commission and the member states. Because it started to be recognized as a policy issue, it was also reflected in the new communication on the new era and then in the Ljubljana Declaration, where gender-based violence was named as one of the 6 priority areas for the upcoming period of time. And consequently, it was also mentioned in the EU Pact for Research and Innovation, both among values and principles, and as a priority area for joint action by the Union. There's, of course, the wider policy landscape surrounding this outside the European research area. So the issue of gender-based violence is clearly part of the EU gender equality strategy, being free from violence and stereotypes. The European Union also acceded to the Istanbul Convention. And in 2024, we have the Directive on Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence. And here I want to specifically mention the fact that the obligations in this directive should not be interpreted as interfering with the autonomy of higher education institutions, because the autonomy is sometimes invoked by representatives of higher education institutions as something that should keep them free from any mandates or impositions from, let's say, the state administration and the government in terms of policies to combat gender-based violence. And then this year, there is the Roadmap for Women's Rights, which again mentions freedom from gender-based violence as an area that Commission will be addressing in the upcoming period of time, and the gender equality strategy for the post-25 period is currently being prepared. So when we look specifically at the ERA policy agenda, the European research area, following the documents that were adopted in 2020, 2021, the member states and the Commission agreed on priority areas for a period that ended last year. And ERA Action 5 was to promote gender equality and foster inclusiveness, taking note of the Ljubljana Declaration. And we can see that in the explanatory document, the issue of gender-based violence was mentioned, and one of the key objectives was to work towards development of an EU baseline, such as Zero Tolerance Code of Conduct on gender-based violence in research and innovation. And so this is where a document that was created last year, Zero Tolerance Code of Conduct, comes from, and also the Commission proceeded to open a call for proposals under which the GenderSAFE project was funded. So the body that is working on the implementation of the ERA policy agenda with the specific remit of gender equality and inclusiveness is the ERA Forum Subgroup on Inclusive Gender Equality. It was set up in March 23. It's comprised of member states, associated countries, and ERA umbrella organizations that sign up for this priority. And the tasks are to assist the Commission in relation to implementation of existing Union legislation, programs, and policies, preparation of legislative proposals and policy initiatives, and then coordinate among the member states and with the umbrella organizations so that we continue to advance in the implementation. And so this ERA Forum subgroup worked on the Zero Tolerance Code of Conduct. Part of this was to review scholarly debates on the concept of zero tolerance and the issues surrounding this concept, because many of you may be aware that it's not a straightforward concept. There are strong criticisms coming from feminist positions. So to make sure that we have an understanding that is robust. And so the finalized conceptualization presented in the Zero Tolerance Code of Conduct is positioned within the framework of institutional change. the state-of-the-art, the Zero Tolerance Code of Conduct is state-of-the-art. It builds on the UNICEF 7P framework as the underlying basis for actions that need to be taken. And it is organized in 3 pillars of commitment, action, and accountability. It defines roles and responsibilities for all the ERA stakeholders, institutions, research funding organizations, umbrella organizations, national authorities, and the European Commission. For the current ERA policy for the period 25 to 27, there is the structural policy strengthening gender equality and inclusiveness in the ERA, notably with an intersectional approach. So this is very good because we have intersectionality foregrounded. And in this slide, you can see all the planned outcomes. You can see that there are quite a few for the brief period of 3 years. And one of those is to implement the Code of Conduct on Gender-Based Violence developed in the previous period. What does this mean specifically? The outcomes of this are to be the increased commitment and greater awareness of the steps necessary to end gender-based violence at all levels. And here, the GenderSAFE project is already and has already made contributions to achieving this. So last year in September, the GenderSAFE pledge was launched, which invites institutions and individuals to pledge their commitment to work on implementing the Zero Tolerance Code of Conduct. And it has, as I said, many recommendations that should be taken on board. In GenderSAFE, we also have a community of practice with 6 circles where institutions are working to advance policies, learn from one another, and advance. And we also conduct capacity building and training sessions, many of which are available as recorded and available to the wider community. The second outcome is to achieve intensified implementation of the measures to counteract gender-based violence, and by that create safer working and studying environments. And so this is where the institutional self-assessment tool comes in. It's really to support the implementation by creating the evidence base. And we are also developing a model policy framework that will assist institutions to develop institutional policies because it covers all the bases that should be addressed and provides alternatives to what the options can be. So the institutional self-assessment tool, which you will hear more from Panagiota very shortly, contributes to by identifying gaps in institutional policies and suggesting actions that institutions should take. It supports implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of institutional policies. As a result, this will raise standards across the ERA and strengthen institutional credibility to researchers and students alike. It clearly signals leadership commitments and will also contribute to ERA-wide mutual learning. And with all of this, it will provide input for policymaking at national and EU levels if we have enough and large number of institutions that are using this. So this is all from my side. Thank you very much. And I hope that the tool will be used widely and will be appreciated by the community.
Thank you so much, Marcela, for setting the scene and walking us through the broader policy environment and the institutional context that really shaped the development of the tool. So we will now move from the why to the how, and I'm pleased to hand over to Panagiota.
Yes, thank you, Vasia. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Marcela, for this great introduction. I'll go ahead and start with my presentation. So as Marcela mentioned, the Institutional Self-Assessment Tool supports research performing organizations in evaluating their institutional capacity and progress towards addressing gender-based violence. It's designed as a developmental self-assessment instrument, and throughout the assessment, institutions are able, as mentioned before, to identify their strengths, areas for improvement across a set of 7 impact drivers, across 7 key areas that have been identified as essential preconditions that allow this effective address of gender-based violence to be realized. So the tool acts as a structured learning instrument that helps to guide internal planning, to guide our dialogue and strategic planning through the feedback report that we also review later, that's generated once the assessment is completed. The tool, as mentioned also by Marcela, draws on the experience of the EU-funded project GenderSAFE, but also UniSafe, and it adapts the impact driver methodology that was originally developed by another EU-funded project, CASPER project. Today, we'll briefly review the structure of the tool and its impact drivers and indicators. We'll understand the value of using this tool. I'll also share some key practical tips and advice, and then I'll showcase what you can expect when completing the assessment. We'll conclude with some information on where you can access it, and I'll also demonstrate the tool itself through the online platform. So let's look into the model now behind the assessment. As I mentioned, the assessment is structured along 7 impact drivers. These are 7 thematic areas that represent the critical components that are necessary, that are needed in order to embed a more comprehensive policy to gender-based violence. Each of these impact drivers includes 1 to 7 indicators that are designed in order to measure specific aspects of institutional readiness, of the commitment, of the implementation, but also progress. We'll review these indicators in the next slide. To assess progress, the model adopts a 6-stage maturity framework. These stages of institutionalization, they range from starting point, level 0, where we have little or no action in place at all, to full institutionalization, level 5, where we have structures, we have policies, we have practices that are actually embedded, they're continuously improved, and they're broadly owned across the organization. These stages allow institutions also to self-assess where they currently stand, but at the same time, they identify actionable steps for moving forward. We'll look into these levels later. But they also acknowledge something very important that it's important to state here. Progress is not linear. Institutions may be at different stages across the different impact drivers. So that's important to have in mind. Let's dive into the indicators for a bit. As mentioned, each of these impact drivers has a set of 1 to 7 indicators. In this table, you see them in more detail. Each indicator captures a distinct interrelated element of institutional development. For example, the existence of and clarity of policies, the availability of trained personnel, the integration of intersectional perspective, and many, many more. These indicators, they enable a more nuanced assessment of how gender-based violence is approached across policy, across practice, in the infrastructure, in the organizational culture. And as you see, the last 2 impact drivers, the very last, the coverage of the different Ps, reflects the 7P model that UniSafe and GenderSAFE follows. And overall, the tool, Marcela mentioned that before, is aligned with the zero tolerance approach that is adopted at the EU level. I think this is important also to highlight. Now, when it comes to the assessment that each user has to complete for each impact driver, each indicator is assessed using a rubric. This rubric outlines what performance actually looks like at the 6 different levels. As you see on the screen, we now have the impact driver number 3, which is the victim-centered approach for addressing gender-based violence. It has only 1 indicator, 3.1, which has the same name, and that indicator is assessed across these 6 levels. You see the 6 rubrics. These rubrics, they serve as both diagnostics and a developmental tool, because they help institutions to understand first where they currently stand, what is the current status, but they also offer a concrete description of what progress looks like. So the user reads those and they select the level, the rubric that reflects their institutional reality. And we have a tip here. If you're in doubt between the two levels, we always advise to select the lower level, because the higher level assumes that all elements from the previous levels are in place. Now, let's look into the value of using this assessment, this tool. Its value lies on its ability to provide a snapshot of your current strengths and weaknesses of your policy framework. So it acts as a strategic instrument for institutional change. The results of the assessment can be very powerful for your internal advocacy, because they provide concrete and data-driven insights that help DI officers, gender equality teams, gender-based violence focal points to make a stronger case for institutional commitment, to make a stronger case when you are asking for more resources, on when you request policy reform. And following on that, we recommend that this assessment is not filled only once. We recommend that institutions repeat the assessment periodically to track the progress over time, ideally between 12 to 18 months. Now, beyond the diagnosis, the tool also directly supports strategic decision-making, because it helps the user identify where to focus your efforts, whether on capacity building, whether on updating your procedures, or engaging more with external stakeholders. So it's also helping you make strategic decision-making. And lastly, it fosters collective reflection, because the process itself, the process of filling the assessment, completing the assessment, it can act as a conversation starter. It encourages internal dialogue among your change agents, among leadership, your staff, and it builds a shared understanding and a sense of ownership around gender-based violence prevention, response, and address. Having said that, let's now look into a few practical tips and advice before you start completing the assessment. Who should fill it out? That's a very common question and an important question. We recommend that the assessment is completed by a small team with high level of institutional knowledge. Because the tool assesses different aspects of the institution's practices and culture, it's important that the members that are selected, they have a high level of institutional knowledge and experience. They can come from teams such as the Human Resources or the Gender Equality or EDI Committee, or staff members that are working on gender-based violence, ombuds team. And having said that, we advise that in order to fill it with all these members together, you have a dedicated session, either online or in person, where you review together the impact drivers and indicators. And for this, we are providing a preview file of the tool, so you can review these indicators and rubrics in details before joining the online platform. We recommend that the team first reviews the preview files, which also outlines the progression towards institutionalization, because in this way, the team gains an understanding of what is the end goal, where do we want to go, so we know what the institution can aspire to, right? So when filling the assessment, only one member of the team has to fill the actual online platform. So that's important to mention it here. Another common question: how long does it take? Typically, the self-assessment takes between 2.5 to 3 hours, ideally with the small group that I just mentioned. And the duration here, it's important to clarify that it depends a lot on the team's familiarity with internal processes and document access. In instances where multiple departments needs to be consulted, or the organization is structured in a more complex way, it's more likely that it will take up to 7 hours for the first-time users. But of course, any subsequent assessment will take less. And following this question, can you post the assessment while you complete it, while you are already in the online platform and completing it already? Yes. your progress will be saved. The assessment provides the option for the user to save the progress and pause, and you can continue where you left off using the link that was included, that will be included in your welcome email. So make sure you add a valid email in your in the first page of the assessment once you start it. I'll showcase where that is in the next slides. And another tip here is that before you start, we recommend that you read and understand two important files, the terms of use and data protection files, because they outline information on data ownership, on data processing, on confidentiality. You preview the file that I mentioned before that gives you an overview of the details of the assessment, but you also review the glossary because you will be then familiarized with terms that will be used throughout the tool. And lastly, you can also review the frequent asked question page because it outlines key common questions as those that I have just addressed in addition to others. Upon completing the assessment, that's the important part, you will be able to download a report. This report includes first, a spider graph that summarizes performance across the 7 impact drivers, narrative output that describes your institution's maturity level for each indicator, an impact driver, and most importantly, tailored recommendations and advice on how to progress to the next level. And together with that, you also get access to resources from UniSafe Toolkit, but also GenderSAFE outputs. So you can access the tool today using the link that you see on the screen, which is under the GenderSAFE website. From there, you will be directed to the UniSafe Toolkit page, where you can find more information, the frequent asked question page, and the link to the tool. In order to access the tool, you don't have to create any account or there's no need to log in. Let's look into the tool, how it looks like. So as you see now, the tool is available on an online platform. On the first page, you are required to fill some administrative information for your institution, including your contact email that I mentioned before that you have to add in order to have access to the tool, if you want to continue another time. And once you click continue, you now view the first impact driver and its 2 indicators. As you see, you will have to select the level of institutionalization that describes better the status of each indicator. And for each question, you have also some space to provide further information on 2 things. First, how would you justify or explain your assessment? This is important to write a few words on why you chose the level you chose, but you can also add any references for evidence or proof, such as links to policies or links to campaigns you run. These information are useful particularly for future reference, for your internal use once you have the final report. So we highly recommend you to fill those. So with this, I conclude the presentation of the tool. If you have any question, please note them down or you can go ahead and send them already in the chat box and we'll be happy to address them at the end. So I'll pass the floor back to Vasia.
Thank you so much, Panagiota, for this excellent presentation and also demonstration of the tool. I will now turn to our first test user reflection. So I'm very pleased to invite Iveta Bayerová from Salers University to share her experience with the tool. So Iveta is the Equal Opportunities Agenda Coordinator at Charles University and Secretary of the Equal Opportunities Board, an advisory body to the Rector on Equality, Diversity and Inclusion. She's a third-year PhD candidate in applied ethics at the Faculty of Humanities, where her research connects care ethics with strategies for fostering inclusive gender equality and transforming academic culture. She's the vice chair of the Coimbra Group's Equality and Diversity Working Group and co-represents it in the ERA Forum subgroup on inclusive gender equality. So thank you so much, Iveta. Could you start by telling us a bit about how your team organized the assessment process and your overall impressions?
Yes, Vasia, thank you very much. I'm happy to share our experience. Maybe for the beginning, I will just, for the context, tell you something about Charles University, because I think it's important to know what type of institution we are, because we are really big, old university, the oldest in the Czech Republic, with 17 faculties and even more university units. We have more than 50,000 students and around 13,000 employees. So it's really a huge amount of people. And if you want to change something in this kind of old institution, it's not very easy. And it's also something that we had to tackle while testing the tool, because then it's hard to decide about where you fit in the best. So how we were proceeding. I invited our university-wide ombudswoman from the rectorate, who is dealing with reports of inappropriate behavior, but she's also in charge of prevention measures and raising awareness. She works on policies and doing like the overall work at the university concerning social safety, gender-based violence, and inappropriate behavior in general. So we cooperate quite closely. My position is Equal Opportunities Agenda Coordinator, so I'm in charge of implementation Gender Equality Plan, and activities of the Ombudswoman are part of this equality plan. So that's why we are in a close touch. And the third person who participated in our session was coordinator of the Ombuds Office. It's like the closest colleague of our Ombudswoman. And they cooperate closely with. She's also dealing partly with reports, but she's helping with all the activities that the Ombuds Office does. I think it's needed to mention that at Charles we have more ombudspersons. Every faculty has its ombudsperson or contact person. So there is a network of cooperating people who are dealing with reports of inappropriate behavior. But these weren't part of our session. It was like on the rectorate level, and we were trying to assess how we are doing at the overall level, which was quite challenging, let's say. So I have sent them in advance all the materials we had for testing, so that both of my colleagues could go through the tool and see how we will work with it. Then we organized online meeting, which took 2 hours. I was making notes from the discussion to be able to insert it in the tool. We would need more time to do it really properly. I think it's like 3 hours minimum, and then still it needs some after work to include all this like proofs that you have really these things on place, and to describe how you think these policies are in place, for example, because as mentioned, you should repeat the assessment later, and we need to count with the fact that people in universities or in workplace change. So if someone wants to follow up then on you and you might not be there, you need to be really clear about what you meant, because that's the thing we had to somehow solve also, was that we had different point of views on some issues. Like, I think I tended to be more optimistic, like to assess that we are like doing quite well, but our ombudswoman was more pessimistic in some parts, for example. I think it's maybe because like she is in the real world of reports and the dealing with things, and I'm more like this policy and strategy person in the university, so I tend to see how we are trying to move forward, but she's like dealing with real people and see how it works at the faculties and with real real reports and situations. So this was something we needed to discuss a lot, and that's why I think it's also important to describe it really properly. Why do you think you assess yourself the way you state there for you, but also for other people who might join your group next time? Yes, we found it quite user-friendly, but yes, that was our main problem, was to discuss and decide where we fit, and also it's connected with the size of our institution, as I mentioned, because we, for example, at the rectorate level, we are like the starting point of all the measures, and we are, for example, our ombuds office prepared like guidelines for solving reports of inappropriate behaviors. So we have a policy in place and some guidelines how people should proceed. But still, when you then go on the faculty level, it differs at each part of the university. We are trying to have some common standards of ombudspersons at faculties, but still it varies when you look at one medical faculty or at Faculty of Humanities. It's really different, and it depends a lot on deans and leadership of faculties. So then it was hard for us to decide where we should fit us. Yes, so that's why we tended then to give this lower assessment of us, because we couldn't say that everything works perfectly, even though we are trying to, because we are still at some level, it doesn't work as we would say at the rectorate level, for example. For the usage, I would really recommend this. I think that it's great also to meet and discuss at all, just this, to have this intensive meeting with people who are in charge of safety at the university is very valuable to find time for this, because you really learn about your institution, you learn what you can do more, which is very important, and where it might help us in future as well, I think, is when we will plan our new gender equality plan. As Ben also mentioned, that it can be useful with strategic planning. I totally agree, because it can help you to look on the gaps you have. It gives like really complex view of the problem of gender-based violence, and maybe you will find out that there are things that you even haven't considered that are important. So this is something where I think we can use the tool. I think it could be also good, for example, with advocacy for the topic. Like the current situation at Charles University is the change of the highest management. We will have the new rector in few months. He is elected. He was elected like a few weeks ago, and we will see what will his approach be to this topic, and we can use this tool, I think, to show where we stand, what is needed to be done, what is like where we should aim with our efforts, what is like good or estimated as good level on European level, and where we can take inspiration. So this is something where we can use it. So I would really recommend it if you want to see how you stand, what is your situation, and it's really worth you doing also for meeting with colleagues and really have focused discussion and to open your eyes on what you can do more. So I hope I covered everything like this, Vasia.
Yes, thank you so much, Iveta, for sharing your experience, but also your reflections on how to apply also the tool, not only the experience of completing it as such. So if you have any questions, I encourage you to add them in the chat box. I can see a few already. But before that, we will now turn to our second test user, that is Iveta. So I'm delighted to give the floor to Jennifer Kirman from Oxford Brookes University. A few words about Jennifer Kirman is an adult nurse, midwife, and health visitor by professional background. Jen is an associate professor at Oxford Brookes and leads an annual interprofessional conference for Brookes students and staff on violence against women and girls. She's the co-founder and co-chair of the university's Gender-Based Violence Advisory Group. So without any further ado, thank you so much, Jen.
Thank you so much. And it's really nice to see so many familiar faces now that I've met some of you in Prague. So thank you as well for being here today. So my colleague Rachel, my double act, is not very well today. So I'm here alone, but she's here in spirit with us. I just wanted to share with you firstly that it's our second year of using the tool. The first year was last summer. And a small group of professionals got together and did the first testing, which provided some insight into what we needed in place for this year. So I think the first thing to say is we love it. It's very easy to use, but we do have some things that we found a bit tricky. But overall, we find this a very positive experience. And thank you so much for all of the presentations so far. And we can echo some of the sentiment at challenges, but also brilliance of the tool as well. So we found it really useful to show the gaps where the 7Ps lie within our institution. We were already showing areas of good practice, and I think, as already acknowledged, myself and Rachel, we lead the advisory group at Brookes. We were the lead professionals, and we might be more optimistic because we have a full view of lots of things, but we did this year with one other professional who was a part of our gender-based violence advisory group. So the three of us tried to represent the whole university, which was impossible. I think that's the first thing to say, is it is quite tricky to do for a whole institution. So you need a full representation if you're doing this in its entirety for the institution. You need to really plan this in advance. One thing which has already been explored today was that there was some discussion around interpretation of the dimensions and the questions, which took some time to establish a shared understanding. So possibly the language in the future might be tweaked as we develop a shared understanding of appropriate language, maybe. It is time consuming, and it's not something you can plan quickly. It's something that you possibly need to plan way in advance and put this into an annual plan with the right people. We did this in the summertime, which is often a time of quietness. It's not at all for many people, but there were less people around to ask to help us do this. It took us 2 hours, I would say exactly the same, but we probably needed a lot longer, which is exactly what I've heard today already. So the university's approach at the moment is not adopting the full institutional gender-based violence policy, which we've alluded to today, which is the brilliant policy framework. And we are one of the testing sites. So it puts us at an advantage to some degree because we've got some things in place. But we found that because of the way that we're choosing to adopt the policy framework, which is taking sections of it and applying it to policies that are for review or updating or policies that are new, that maybe that skewed our data a little bit. So we had areas that were very good and areas for development. But that was good. It showed us really. So I think our top tips for people and our experience is that you do need the right people in the room to understand the 7Ps, and it's an opportunity to bring people together and identify your stakeholders to do this with you. It really needs planning into a year, and it needs consideration in terms of university strategy. So knowing what sort of policies, the direction of your university for the next year is useful because you need the right people there really. We do have a recommendation, and what we're going to do next time and test this for GenderSAFE, whether you like it or not, we're going to do this. We actually don't think it's sensitive enough for what we need as a university. And what we're going to do is it's just too broad to find out everything we need it to find out. So we're going to identify a champion across all departments at the university, whether that's student facing, whether that's staff facing, HR, whether that is in academic roles. We have a broad range of allies and stakeholders, and we're going to ask them to complete it for their school, for their department. And with that, we hope we'd have a greater sense of ownership and a more sensitive view of where the areas of real concern and or celebration are in the university. So going forward, every summer we're going to be having quite a large event, but bringing together a number of people to show them what to do and then follow that up with support for each of those departments and teams. So it will be a much bigger process, but we think that the results will be much more sensitive. So, as I indicated, our next steps are a department-based approach. We'd like to then ensure we have allies across all of the departments that we're interested in, which will be every, really. To do that, we've identified we need a train the trainer and buddy system to make sure that this works. And what we really then want to do is compare that data across schools. And we're going to ask our Vice-Chancellor, which I understand is the equivalent of the head of the university for others, and we want them to be there at that stage to actually help us with this so that it reaches the senior leadership level. So that's as far as we have got, and obviously there are questions and comments in the box for later, but thank you for the opportunity today.